What up, everybody? Scuffy here, and welcome to the Training Cage series. Today we are going to be talking about budget decks. Budget decks. What is a budget deck? What does it mean? How does it relate? How does it affect how you can play the game? What are the optimal ways to use a budget deck? So first off, let me explain what I say when I say budget deck. Budget deck is a deck, in my opinion, and this definition is fluid. It can be different for you, for some other players, but for the most part, I view a budget deck, to be comprised primarily of rare and common rarities. There may be 1 to 2 epics, and at most 2 legendaries. And that's at most. Typically, you might only have 1 legendary, and the deck can operate just fine. The upgrade of rarities in your deck does not hinge, or your success of your deck, rather, does not hinge on the upgrading of the rarities of your deck. Most decks, especially Legion builds, really operate by using as many of the legendary cards they possibly can fit into their deck, because these are just great cards, and then, bolstered by some epics. It just helps build a stronger format, and then they go in and fill in with the commons and rares as far as what decks are going to, what cards just to fill in those spots. They start from the top down. Budget decks start from the bottom up. Now, there are a few common elements amongst budget decks, but the most specific one is just direct forwardness. Every card in your deck is going to be very tied to one similar thing. It's no mistake that Garvey Loken is a key component in a couple budget builds, primarily burn decks. His ability, he's a starter card. He comes with the faction. You don't have to pay anything. He comes with the game, rather. It doesn't come with the faction. You get him for free. His ability deals damage. The Sons of Horus faction that he is in have a lot of common cards that do this as well, that bolster down and body down on this card. This is a rare. It stuns and draws you a card, but then we've got more commons here that are doing damage. We've got common troops that deal damage, just in terms of their bodies and their drop pod, or drawing you a card, kind of building up on that. And then you've got a few, rares that might really help either supply board consistency in terms of the 2 drops, or are just additional powerhouses if they can't be contested. And you might just squeeze in 1 legendary. Now, this is just with Loken within the Sons of Horus faction as an example. All of these cards do damage. That's it. Straightforward. Boom. Hit hard. Do damage. Draw cards. Do damage. Draw cards. Draw cards to keep doing damage. That's the theme of the Sons of Horus in general, but it makes for a very easy build with Loken. Conversely, do damage, which that's how you win the game. But do damage is aggro. It's aggressive, and that is probably the biggest playstyle that benefits from a budget style deck. The World Eaters are another prime example of this, in the fact that their warlord, whether you have Erlin, who deals damage, or you have Karn, who can deal some random damage and attack for twice, Dar, who deals a lot of damage, now that he's been upgraded, or Angron, who is just straight up aggressive in your face, attacking damage. You've got all that, and then it is fueled by the fury and the fervor of the pool within the cards itself. Rares add to that speed and that brutality, and they add to the additional damage. And then you might include in there a couple epics, as well as 1 to 2 legendaries. The second legendary in the Angron builds might be Manifest Destiny. It might be Atham. In Karn or in Shabrandar, it may be another one of the Wraith or Argus Brond within the faction itself. You're not going to get too many more than that. You don't have to have a Gorefather. You don't have to have a Macer Varen. You certainly don't have to have many or any of the legendary neutral cards added. If you do, they're great to have as a general card, but they don't do anything for the deck itself. Jukebox Starsight does not do damage. He puts something on the board, he gives you some options, but in terms of tying into the key of the deck build, aggro and aggressive and doing damage and being straightforward, that's what he's doing for you. He's not doing that. So he's not required. Now, those are two examples as far as how a faction can be so easily used for budgets. Why are budget decks important? Budget decks are important for new players. Okay, so let's go ahead and practice build a little Loken deck here, just for posture, just to show how simple it should be, and it should be simple as a new player. We're going to pretend that we don't see too many epics or too many legendaries, right? We're going to go, let's just do a frag grenade because that's damage. Quickfire, that's damage. We're just taking the damage stuff right now. Damage and drawing cards, right? Just like I said, damage and drawing cards. Damage and drawing cards. We're just going commons first. We're going to need at least one outflank because that's always good to destroy things. And then we're going to go into the neutral pool, and the neutral pool fuels us even further with some of the damage cards that it's got. You can throw in a Seek and Destroy. Let's throw in 2 because typically you start off with 2 of those. Definitely want a Breach, an Informant Network. We're going to get into some nice commons here. Artillery Strike. And, Defensive Satellites. As a new player, you love it and you hate it. And then let's get into the Imperial Army stuff. Now, these are all commons. I've not put any rares in the deck just yet. These are cards that are doing damage when they hit, or cards that do damage when they stay aboard, or they're drawing you cards. And I know there's Mortar Strike in here. That's a good one I want to have. Definitely want a good Mortar Strike. Throw 2. Now, let's see. Oh, yep, Hunan's Wardens. He does damage there. And that gives us about 7 extra spots, at which point we can fill in with some epics and rares. Now, this is not your ideal, perfectly tuned Loken deck. It doesn't need to be. It's pretty straightforward. But it is a very solid foundation for a Loken deck. You want to draw a card a little bit. Maybe you want a couple of these guys, which are actually commons. And then let's get into the rares. Where do we say here? We got 1 legendary, Vengeful Spirit, right? And then let's do a couple fast guys, couple rares, and just one of these guys. That's it. This deck here, that's it. I've got 1, 2, 3 rares, a legendary, 0 epics. And it does Loken, and it's all burn, it's all damage, it's all aggressive. This is a standard, I can't say super standard, but this is a very easy example of what a Loken budget deck looks like. It should be easy to play. It should be not a whole lot of complexity to it. You don't need to have fine-tuned optimal play cards. Every card does the one thing that it does, and they all tie together. This isn't much different than an Angron deck, other than the fact that there's 11 troops as opposed to maybe 4 or 5 troops, maybe 6 troops depending on how you run him. But it's all damage. The difference with the upgraded, when I say upgraded, I use that term loosely. Let's take a look at my Angron deck here, which is used. And there might be a couple more epics to this deck. We've got Manifest Destiny, and we've got Armor of Mars. We've got 2 legendaries. In terms of epics, I've got 2 Gore Childs, 2 Void Engagements, no Survivors. Now, that's 6 epics, 3 legendaries. I almost forgot Remembrance Order, as well as the Warlord. Now, Angron could be Karn, he could be Shabrandar. If you're lucky to get a Primarch, there are some Primarchs who can do budget decks very easily. So collectively, amongst the deck itself, you could argue that I've got 2 legendaries higher than I need to have. I don't need to have Manifest Destiny. It helps. I don't need to have Remembrance Order at all. It's nice when it works out. It doesn't. Remembrance Order, though, it's a legendary, but it's free for all players if you follow the steps to get it. So I'm not really counting that way. I count it as like a free card. Rarity wise, I guess you can't have two of them, so we'll take it. The void engagements, the one of the gore childs, maybe even the survivor, no survivors. No survivors could very easily be the common version. Artillery strike. It's just a souped up version. Does it do anything differently? It still does 2 damage. Very rarely, especially with only 4 troops, are you actually going to get any sort of marks of chaos on your troops. So it's not really doing anything for me other than just consistent 2 damage. But this is it. The rest of it is rares and commons. Commons that do damage, or add 2 damage, or draw cards to get to those cards that will let me do damage. That's what this build does. That's what, not much different than the Loken deck, aside from the way that the 2 legions are different. They don't have the world leaders don't have a vengeful spirit. They have their warlord and maybe a Serk land speeder with a sweeping advance attached, and that's a little bit of a combo, but that's how they would close out the game. So, what deck types make the best the best budget decks? Quite frankly, I think aggro decks make the best budget decks in terms of how they work, just because there are so many cards, as we saw within the collection itself. There are so many cards in factions as well as within the neutral card pool that do damage. That whether they're the epic degree or the common degree that do damage, that just destroy troops, and you throw those on and you just build that up over time. They don't require a lot of pieces working together. Combo decks, I would say, are probably the most contingent upon rarities, because some cards, for instance, the Custodes card. The Custodes are a very combo-driven faction. Although they've got beefy troops, really their decks hinge upon a lethal combination of playing out Michaeler Coburnus, which is a legendary, the effects of Paragon Spear, which is a legendary, as well as bolstered by fast troops such as the jet bikes, which I can't find for some reason right now. Where are they at? There we are. The Trajanard jet bikes. Been scrolling past them back and forth. Or Goldstone Hunters, which although they've been nerfed, are still effective. Hunting Eagles, which are epics, Telemon Dreadnoughts, which are epics, and then maybe also throwing in there the Manifest Destiny, again, another legendary, Duke Mortimer, legendary, Jubok, legendary, just legendaries. You have got some commons within that to help perpetuate their ability to deal damage, but it really hinges upon having multiple card types, multiple cards, and multiple card types. And that's why combo decks probably are not your budget option decks to go to, simply because if it's a rare intensive deck, or there are 2 or 3 higher rarity cards that you need to play that combo, it just doesn't work. The Night Lords are a perfect example of this in terms of their deck. 9 times out of 10, actually 10 times out of 10 at this point, use just about every single one of their legendaries. The only exception might be Curz's Chosen. You might not see that so often, but you always see Endroshek, Nostromo, Mercy and Forgiveness, and quite frankly, you see them because the faction itself needs them. These warlords really get fine-tuned, and they need those tools to bolster the damage that they do, the way that they control the board and dominate or build up to a lethal threat, to survive, to get to that 9-drop to throw out the Raven. And if it's a Curse deck, it's even higher in rarity, because you might have Apotheosis, you're going to have Asteroid Sanctuaries, you're going to have Reapers of Kaldrak. These epics are here for a reason for this faction. They use them a lot, and they're needed. The same thing can be true for Death Guard. While the Death Guard play, you don't see them very often, all of their epics, as well as their legendaries, are very good, and are kind of critical in keeping the Death Guard play style afloat. The Death Guard that's one thing when I started playing the game, it took me the longest time to even play the Death Guard, although I had a Garrow Warlord, because of the lack of the epics and legendaries that I had. And at the time, they weren't even great. Endurance was great. Death Shroud was great. But Mortarian's Resolve, this is before when it cost 10 energy and didn't do half of what it does now. Defensive Maneuver was a terrible card, but I still needed Captain Ujioj, I needed Vengeance, I needed Plague Marines, I needed Endurance. You can't play and play consistently this faction without those key cards to really feel comfortable, not counting all the other neutral cards that could be offered as such. So there are some factions that do rarity better or budget decks better than others. There certainly are. I think the Emperor's Children, while they can benefit strongly from having legendaries, they could really operate just fine with one legendary, a lot of rares and commons, and then maybe a couple epics. Saul Tarvet's decks can work wonders with just that and doing out some amazing damage, and with the buffs and playing their troops on curve and gaining perfection. Then there are, like I said, then there are those decks like Night Lords or Blood Angels who just thrive, who without their legendaries, without their epics, don't work well. So you kind of have to take a look at if you want to play a budget deck, or if you're looking to break into the game, where are your avenues? What are your paths? You might be limited at first to play an aggro deck or an aggro playstyle, and as time accumulate more cards to sift out into other concepts, but it'll become worthwhile. I would probably say, in terms of going through each of the factions, Sons of Horus, World Eaters, Emperor's Children can easily become budget deck concepts. I would also probably say the Thousand Sons. The Thousand Sons could be. They are a combo. They're certainly a combo based faction. They could be a budget friendly deck, in the fact that they're really only two legendaries that they need to have or should want to have are Penthudast and Izzar-Kor. The Witchfire, the Astral Warfare, and the Ashen Blow, those are all commons, and those are solid cards, as well as Octo being a rare. And then you can kind of fill that in with other neutral cards as needed. There's only one epic within their faction that's super critical currently, as the faction is now. However, the other cards that you fill in within the neutral deck kind of decides how rare intensive that is. For instance, an Ahriman deck is not a budget deck. Ahriman giving precognition to a lot of the troops out there, like Duke Mortimer, Jubok. Those are legendaries, epics, merits, mercenaries. It becomes rare intensive for a reason, because it works well with his ability. However, Amon, Phosis Takar, even Magnus the Red can very easily operate with just using common and maybe rare support troops. As a combo faction, why are they different? They're different because of that Psyker energy, that second energy pool. I think if they didn't, if their cards were not second energy pool, you might see Astral Warfare or Witchfire being an epic as opposed to the commons that they are. But they have that second energy pool, so that really throws a lot of it off. Word Bearers are definitely not a budget-friendly deck. Neither are Ruinstorm faction. I would also say that Iron Hands and Salamanders are not budget-friendly, nor is the Raven Guard, Space Wolves, Custodes. The Ultramarines, I think you could definitely make a budget Ultramarine deck very easily, either with Thiel, Remus, Gilliman. They all work well. They all bolster troops. They've got a lot of common and rare tactics. Their legendaries, although nice, are not as needed, and you could really just operate with them at Crag's Honor. And then the rest of that, you're just throwing out some solid troops. If you happen to have an Ancient Marcellus or two, that's your epic. The rest of it is just damage and buffing, and damage and buffing, and damage and buffing, and using your Warlord's ability to bolster. It's not necessarily super aggressive. It's more mid-range deck, but there's a lot of aggressive tactics there that you can throw out, and your card creation to keep that going. Orphans of War, I would probably argue, is not a legendary, or it's not a budget-friendly deck, in the fact that their epics, their rares are good, but their legendaries are super good. Tyro especially, and then they hinge on a lot of epic or high rarity common cards that are being used. Jubok, Manifest Destiny, Atham, and the like. Blood Angels, and you could make an argument, depending on your Warlord, for White Scars being a budget deck. Blood Angels are not a budget deck. And then the neutrals themselves can very easily, depending on your Warlords, be budget. So there's when I say budget decks, it's not just one faction. It's not just Sons of Horus. It's not just World Leaders. Those are the examples that I gave you. You can make that work for a variety of factions. There are certainly some factions that's just not going to be an option for you. If you're trying to make a budget-friendly Blood Angels or Night Lords deck, you are going to run into some problems. Doesn't mean that it's impossible, but you will find at a certain point that you will get better results searching for and using those high rarity cards, because that's the way that faction was designed. Whereas there is no need for that Loken deck that we built. There is absolutely no need for that Loken deck to put in any of the other legendary Sons of Horus cards. Certainly can, but they're not going to do what his deck is designed to do. Well, it's nice to put out a 5/7 body or an 8/8 body. For that 7 energy, you can play 2 to 3 tactics that are doing potentially 8 damage or more across the board, and drawing you more cards to get to everything. So again, they're nice, but they take away from what that specific focus deck is to do. So budget decks is kind of, it's pretty straightforward. It should be simple. I hope I have not said that word enough to be annoying, but the fact is, the game itself is, while rarities of cards can drive the effect of a card by any means. I mean, an epic version of a card is always going to be a smidge higher than a rare version of the card, and the legendary versions of cards do something way better than epics and rare versions do. That's why they're rare. That's why they're sought after. However, they don't define a game. The game is not super rare intensive. You can play and win very easily with commons and rares and maybe an epic or two before you decide to branch out into higher rarity territory, or to pursue a faction a full faction set and go from there. So don't get frustrated. You should actually enjoy that. Some games, when you play a rare intensive game where you have to have all these rares to win, there are decks that do that, but this game itself does not hinge upon that. And I think that's actually a really good merit of design as it currently stands. So I hope that gives you a little bit of perspective. My definition of budget deck might be different than your definition of budget deck. You might say, well, I want to play without any legendaries. And that's an option. That's very possible. You take that Loken deck and take out that Vengeful Spirit. If you don't have that Vengeful Spirit, you could still put in another card in place of that, whether it be a troop or a tactic. An Orbital Bombardment, for instance, is a rare. You could put that in there, and then you've got the same deck, potentially with even a little bit more damage, depending on how the end game scenario looks like for you. And that's a rare card. So what are the merits of budget deck? In closing, I think the merits of budget deck are for new players primarily to get comfortable with the faction, to get comfortable with the game. But I also think that they're a very easy way to start a focus for a deck. This deck here that kind of threw together, that common Loken, over time, as you get higher rarity cards that you want to try out and test out, you squeeze in, you take out, and eventually this deck evolves from a straightforward draw and damage deck to a deck maybe that utilizes troops and boosting troops and drawing some damage and using the board control, and then it goes from an aggro build to a mid-range play, and that's great. And then you throw in that, maybe you get an Abaddon Warlord or a Tarek Targadon Warlord, and you change out your Warlord, and then you've got a different game plan altogether, and it kind of is your foot in the door to a bigger world in terms of deck building. So that's the biggest merits I see with budget decks, and I hope that you have some ideas or are willing to look into some of those factions. If you are newer to the game and you're looking to see, well, I want to play X faction, but I don't know if I need a lot of cards for them. there are some factions that you're going to need a lot of cards for, and there are some factions that you don't. And I hope that's good news to you. And I hope going through this list here, as I went through the factions as they are currently, that inspires you, or that can reassure you or dissuade you from getting frustrated with a certain faction. If you're playing Night Lords without those legendaries and epics, and you're wondering why they just don't do it, that is why. Whereas if you're playing a faction that has got all the tools for you, and you're wondering, do I need Amalgahurst the Twisted? He's a good card, but is he going to do anything for the deck that you're playing? Do you want to play a different faction? Do you want to play, do you want to play Raven Guard? If you're playing Raven Guard, you want to have these legendaries. You want to have the Raven's Talon and Apothecary Coleman. You can certainly operate with commons and rares, absolutely. But you'll find once you include those cards in your deck, that your deck will, your performance increases, tenfold as a result of that, because that's what they're styled on. Deliverance now is one of those legendaries as well, and that's just counting the cards again within that faction. So, long way of going about it. I hope that's some information as far as budget decks. I would probably say, from looking at the list there's probably about a 60% factions in the game that you can build a budget deck for. A very low rarity deck that is consistent, that utilizes a lot of the common cards within the neutral card pool, as well as the cards within the faction card pool to thrive well, be it troops or tactics. And that's it for me. So I hope this has been beneficial, especially for newer players. This video specifically is more geared toward that, or to somebody who's stepping into the game a little bit or wants to branch out beyond their starter deck. So I hope that has been useful. If this information has, let me know. If it's not, or you want to see something else, or you've got some specific questions, let me know in the comments as well, or like the video. Share the video if you think that it might be useful to any other players that you might know, players that are getting into your lodge or have got questions about how to build certain decks. Certainly take a look around the YouTube channel and see if there's some other videos that might suit your fancy, because I've tried to cover as much as I possibly can to get that information out there. That's it for me, guys. Until next time, keep playing Legions, and we will talk to you later. Bye.